Brian Dameris, former Mavs director of basketball development, co-host of the Take That With You Mavs pod. Welcome to Combos Court, man. How you feeling today?
Good to be here. Excited about the playoffs.
You should be excited. What was your day-to-day like when you worked with the Mavs?
I did analytics before analytics was cool. We were the first team in the NBA to do analytics. So I was mainly doing that. I did some international development, ran the Global Games basketball tournament we did in the summer, which was the under 21 Olympic teams for every team in the country. We had Chris Bosh and Carlos Boozer and Yao Ming back in the day, back in the early mid 2000s.
Can you explain the European influence, the international influence on the game? Because actually, in my opinion, I talked about this before. I have a good idea about European basketball because I played overseas for about 10 years, so I understand the game. But the three things that I think changed the current game the most, the modern game, is basketball analytics, European basketball, and Steph Curry. I don't know if you agree with that, but what do you feel the impact on those things have been on the game?
I think that's 100% correct. I mean, just the last one, Steph Curry, I think we haven't even seen the full impact of that yet, because any kid who is, 8 to 14 that, looked like me and wasn't 6'5", back in the day, we didn't have a route, but now you have a route to play because you can just bomb it away, and they're all shooting from long range. And so as the elite ones get better, they're going to continue to get in the college game, get into the international game, get into the NBA, and shooting is just going to become better and better. I mean, as you know, how many times do we talk about a player and say, yeah, but the only thing he's missing is shooting, right? Which is crazy to think about. Well, that's not going to be an issue as we continue to see all these kids come through, and we've seen a little bit of it, and we're going to see more and more because it's just continuing. In analytics, obviously, we know that's changed everything in terms of how organizations are now run by people that are analytics based. Daryl Morey and others. It's not just a guy in the back office that you look at. And it's changed the way you run offenses. It's changed the way literally everything's done from scouting on down. And then obviously the international game. Look at the top three players in the MVP voting this year, all international players. And number 5 was an international player in Luka. And so you have, going from Dirk coming in 99, who was a power face the basket and shot threes, to centers who can shoot from long range, and the style of play. When Luka got in, remember Luka was the third pick in the draft. Why was he? People thought he had reached his ceiling because he was slow, but he even says this game is easier for him because you can pack the paint, as you know, in Europe.
Yeah.
And you can't do that now. The spacing is better. So, I think you hit the nail on the head with all three of those.
Most definitely. Staying on Luka, I've been high on Luka pre-draft. I said it. I actually posted on my IG stories a little throwback post I had about this guy will be the best player in this draft. It looks like that is the case. Right now, in my opinion, there's no clear number one guy, but I would say that Luka has the best chance to solidify that. I say that because if the Boston Celtics win the championship, it'll be more of a balanced effort, and I don't think anybody would really have Tatum as the number one guy in the league. Maybe I'm wrong, but if the Mavs win the championship, Luka Doncic is that guy.
Well, if you're talking about teams that are left, I think Luka's the best player out there. Right. And so I don't think that's a question, although Tatum has played really, really well in the playoffs and is coming up strong, but he's in the top 7 discussion. I don't know if he's in the top 5 discussion. If you're bringing in age and everything else in the equation, then I think Giannis and Luka are right there in terms of who you'd start a franchise with right now. Obviously, you have Durant, Steph, and Embiid and Jokic and all those guys. But I think if you're talking age, where they are, how they play, then those two, you can flip a coin.
Jason Kidd, the public reaction to the hiring of Jason Kidd was interesting. He's obviously done a great job. Side note, I think he's one of the most underrated basketball players of all time. But in terms of coaching, do you feel he brought more of an analytical approach to the game this season?
I think he brought a more analytical approach than people thought he would. I don't
Okay.
think he came in with that, but if people know what's going on behind the scenes in terms of the game planning, he has that in his mind. If you look at the Utah series, for example, their defensive strategy was to run them off the 3-point line, make them shoot twos. They shot almost half the number of twos they usually shoot in a series in that game. And so we were perfectly willing to trade threes for twos. We knew that the approach was going to be, listen, we're going to get killed on the glass. They have more length. So how do we make up for that rebounding disadvantage? We're going to make it up on the turnover side of the ball. We're going to make it over by killing them. And we were a plus 132 for the series from the 3-point line. So he has brought a more analytical approach than I think people thought he would. But I think the main driver of what he did when he came in, and he even said this after Game 7 against the Suns, he credits Frank Vogel so much for his transformation as a coach in terms of teaching him to chill out, basically, and realize what he can't control, how he needs to relate to superstar players like LeBron, like Luka. Because he had issues in his first 2 stops. Let's just be honest about his coaching style, and he's changed a lot, and he's really changed the culture. He's instilled confidence, positivity. That doesn't mean he's a player's coach and a pushover, but he wants players to play in character, be who they are. And you saw that with Spencer Dinwiddie having 30 points in Game 7, not playing really well the rest of that earlier in that series, but Jay Kidd saying, listen, just be who you are. It'll come around. Here's the positions we can put you in to make you successful. Having players' role is accepting their role and knowing how to execute that role really well. I think he's done a great job at.
Jalen Brunson, Spence are so important to this team, but staying on Spence, when he's at his best, he's like maybe not all-star level, but right there, it just comes to the consistency with him. What do you feel like his impact has been on this team?
Yeah, I mean, I like the trade from the start, and I seem to be in the minority on that because look at Karis LeVert cost a 1 in that same trade line, and Dinwiddie's a better player. And you're looking at a contract in Porzingis where could have easily been forced to attach a 1 to get off of him. So I loved it. It's a wing league. You now add a third playmaker. You can play 3 playmakers at once if you want. You can always have 2 playmakers on the court at one time. You solidify your non-Luka minutes, which is now Dinwiddie and Brunson in the game at the same time, with an area of real concern. If you look last year in the Clippers, we got killed when Luka sat on the bench. So he had to play more and more and got worn out as the series and games went along. So his impact is when Luka's not on there, it's about being an additional playmaker, about being a guy who is absolutely not scared of driving into the lane and opening things up for the shooters on the outside or getting fouled himself and getting to the bucket. Absolutely unconscious, and also play off the ball and catch and shoot, I think, a lot more than people thought he could.
Was the subtraction of Porzingis more important than bringing in some of these guys that they brought in just from like a team morale standpoint? And I still believe in Porzingis as a player, but it didn't seem to be the right mix with Luka.
Yeah, it just didn't seem to fit the way Porzingis wanted to play. This year, he basically had a confab with management and coaches and said, I want to go down the post more. And so they said, okay, let's try that. But the problem is Dwight Powell there in the post, and he's in the post, and Luka needs to drive. And so you have too many people clogging the lane. It just wasn't working. So yes, I do believe in him as a player, but it's in the right system for him. And I don't know that Dallas was the. So when you look at how they're playing defensively now and just running guys off the 3-point line, rotating around, Porzingis just can't play that style. He's not quick enough to pull that off. He's a rim protector, and you want to kind of play a different way. So the best way the Mavs play defense, he couldn't do. And I think that's a real key thing to keep in mind. And of course, we just talked about how it is offensively and how it was a little bit clunky the way Porzingis wants to play. Earlier, when Rick Carlisle was here, they played more of a pick and pop style, which made sense. But then you saw the Clippers take him out of that because they put some length on him and basically neutralized that. And so he was a decoy in the corner. So that didn't work really well. So I don't think it was as much off the court as just really X's and O's on both sides of the floor on the court.
The majority had the Suns beating the Mavs. What was your reaction to Game 7?
Obviously, like everybody, I was surprised. I didn't expect them to have blowout. I thought that if they played their game and they set the tone and they shared the ball and got people involved early, and were able to keep a body on Ayton and continue to play, especially early against Booker, and take them out of their comfort zone, that we would win the game. But I didn't expect it to be, a 46-point game at one point. I think that we just, I say we, the Mavs, sucked the life out of them and got them so frustrated early, taking them out of their offense. You saw Ayton's frustration boil over. Chris Paul was worn down because of what the Mavs were doing, making him work on the defensive end, that they just lost their spirit.
I mean, the Suns obviously weren't at their best, but in my opinion, the Mavs at their best were better than the Suns at their best. Is that fair?
Uh, yeah, I mean, we saw what the Suns at their best can do earlier in the series. They blew out the Mavs, but they all have to be working at a high level. And if anybody is off, like Booker, then the others, and Paul, frankly, both of those players have to play great for them to win. When one of them doesn't, I don't know that the sum of the other parts can carry them. And when the Mavs are clicking, when they're and they have a firm belief in this, that when they are playing their best, they can beat anybody. And I don't know that they're scared of anybody that's left out there. I mean, the Golden State's absolutely tough. Boston and Miami, they're all fantastic teams. But if they know that they're sharing the ball, putting 2 feet in the paint, finding open shooters on offense, and playing that aggressive defensive style, that they can play with anybody.
This is not really a deep basketball take. It's more of my New York City mentality coming out here. But why do people mess with Luka? Like, just leave that guy alone. Once you start messing with him, it's over. Do you think that was a big mistake for Devin Booker to act that way? I mean, we saw what he did to the Clippers, right? When the Clippers tried to intimidate him. Like, I would just say to teams, like, let him play. Like, don't try and intimidate the guy. That's not working.
Yeah, people have to remember, he's 23, but as he's been through the wars in Europe. That's a different game over there. They play tough.
Yeah.
And he's seen it all. He's, as CJ McCollum tweeted, he's seen rocket launchers in arenas, in fireworks, and anything you can imagine. And he did it at a very, very young age, winning Eurobasket at the age of 17. So he's not afraid of anything. And as even said post-game after game 7, the trash talking gets him going. That is fun for him. And so, yeah, you're just poking the bear there.
And I think Draymond is a guy that might poke the bear. I don't think I see anyone else really on that team making that mistake, but I could see Draymond maybe doing that.
Yeah, I don't know if a Poole or somebody is too young and maybe thinks he can do it. But Draymond is going to be a really interesting, watch here, because he's so emotional and he can't really control it. And so, does he sucker the Mavs into something that they don't want to do physically and get somebody in an attack or a flagrant, or vice versa? Does he get into early foul trouble because he's defender and maybe he's trying to do too much? That's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, because we saw in the Sun series it got really chippy in there between the Mavs and the Suns, and that these series, especially when they're competitive and they go long, they breed that contempt, and we'll see how that plays out.
We saw the Suns. They have some pretty good tools that you thought maybe they could throw at Luka. I mean, do you think it's going to even be worse off for the Warriors here? I don't really see anybody staying in front of Luka. I'm sure they'll throw Wiggins on him, maybe.
I think that's their best option, and then he'll just switch off and pick on Curry all the time.
Yeah.
Or pick on Poole. Clay is a step slower now. Yeah, still he'll get to where he needs to get to. I don't think he's there yet. You can't afford, to put Draymond on him because of the foul trouble early. I mean, you may see that some, but his ability to just navigate who he wants and pick and roll and get the switch, because they're going to switch. They're going to play like they did against Harden in those peak Rocket Warriors series. And so it's going to be, I think it's going to be a challenge for the Warriors defensively. Do they just let Luka get his and stay home on shooters, which the Suns tried to do earlier in the series? But there's just a psychological aspect of, you can only let that happen for so long. If he just is living and scoring, do you finally have to throw extra bodies at him and get the ball out of his hands? And then you get in the blender defensively, and that's when the problems start. And that's when we have our open 3-pointers.
That's interesting. I know you're a Mavs guy, but from the Warriors' perspective, what do you think is best?
I think you early on should maybe let him cook
Mm.
and stay home, because the Mavs are at their best when everybody's touching the ball and it's flowing and those 3 pointers are wide open. And the biggest determinant of whether a three is going to go in is how open it is. And we live in the corners. Bullock, Finney Smith took the third most corner threes in the NBA this year. Bullock took the sixth most. We live on those 3 pointers. So, but it's going to be a challenge because the Warriors are going to have a hard time staying in front of Luka. We saw what he did against the Suns.
What do you feel like the keys are defensively for the Mavs?
How they're going to handle Curry. We saw in the last regular season game in the fourth quarter, they trapped the ball out of his hands and made others beat him. And Curry didn't have a single field goal attempt in that loss by the Warriors. So can they do that with Poole, Clay, and that death lineup? And in that game that I just mentioned, Draymond wasn't in it, and he's such an important kind of point forward for them in distributing the ball. So how often do they do that? Do they wait to the fourth quarter to do that, or do they do that earlier, making it really hard for Curry to kind of start the offense and make the others beat you? Because we have seen that since, I'd say, mid-February, Poole's really come along, and that death lineup where they're playing all those smalls, they can beat you if we do get put in the blender ourselves by trapping.
Is it fair to call them the death lineup?
It's not the original, but it's a nice junior facsimile.
Most definitely. How do you see this series going? I mean, would you be surprised either way?
No, I wouldn't be surprised either way. I think it's Mavs in 6. I think they're able to steal one there and then go from there. But it's going to be a really tough series with a bunch of close games going down the stretch. I think the Warriors are going to be more focused than they were. They kind of played with their food a little bit once Morant went out. You saw in that game 4, they were just fiddle-faddling around until they finally won the game late. And I think thought they could do that later, got blown out in game 5, and then took care of business and finally snapped out of it in game 6. So, the Luka Steph matchup is going to bring out the best in both of them. And then it's going to really be a lot of small ball. I think Looney and Powell are going to start the games against each other, but it's going to be a lot of small ball from there out, where it's either Kleba playing the 5, or it's going to be Finney Smith and Bullock in there with the 3 playmakers and playing micro ball for the Mavs, and seeing who can basically run and gun and spread it out more and hit their shots offensively, and who's more effective in their defensive strategies.
We talked a little bit about all the impacts on the modern game. Obviously we're 3-point heavy league now, but where do you see this league going? Are there any trends bubbling up in your opinion?
I think the trends are off the court in terms of health and player performance, and in terms of trying to maximize, recovery and longevity of careers and things of that nature. On the court, there is a limit to how many threes you can take as a percentage of your shots, and the analytics nerds argue that it's maybe it's around 65% of shots, and we're seeing teams routinely shoot half their shots now from 3. So I still think there's some more threes that can happen. Are we going to get? We've seen centers kind of reemerge, at least on the top end, with Embiid and Jokic and Giannis, if you want to call him a 5. So do they creep back into the game somewhat, and we don't get as positionless, or are we getting more continue the positionless trend? So that's kind of what I see, in the game.
Brian, great stuff. You're always welcome back on the show. Where can we find you on social media and everywhere else?
Yeah, Twitter, B Dameris on Twitter. Same thing on Instagram. We got the Take Dad With You podcast, DATWIT. We're for Mavs fans, recording those after every single game. I'm doing Valley Sports Southwest post game after every game, and locally on Dallas on the Ticket pregame before every game. So I'm throwing down the content everywhere.
You're working, Brian. You're working.
That's it.
Thanks so much for taking the time. You're always welcome back, and talk soon.
Appreciate it.